Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's February 21st, 2023, and our meetup this evening is presented by me, Jay Sayers from Skeleton Key. I am going to present tonight going back to the basics and the basics of field indexing. Let me share my screen. I've got just a slight presentation. Hope you folks are all seeing this. So back to the basics, field indexing. The different types of indexes and how they can impact your database. Tonight's agenda, I've got a little plan, got a quick introduction about me, a little bit more about me and what we'll be talking about. But I want to go through what you can expect are knowing what field indexes are in case it is a brand new thing to you and why indexing is important. I'm going to propose that when you create your field index, that you manage the creation of those indexes as opposed to some defaults that we'll see how FileMaker handles them out of the box. And so that'll trickle into the best practices for working with field indexes. I'm probably going to do a better explanation of my best practices that I suggest by doing some demos. And as I mentioned off recording, I really would like this to be a discussion and Q&A. This is not meant to be a presentation of everything about field indexing. So if you hear something or have a what about, feel free to chime in. But I'm hoping to make my demos really, this presentation actually on the quicker side and move right into discussion and participation. So an introduction. I didn't write anything here about the introduction, but my name is Jay Sayers. I've been with Skeleton Key for 7 years, working on completing an 8th one. I came aboard as a senior developer, and I've been in charge of the more recent years of training up new interns to learn FileMaker. They might be brand new to the platform. And so through that process, every once in a while, I'll come across these topics where it's like, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't for just interns. Indexing could be a good topic. And I hope actually to come away with some new information about this as well. So let's dive into indexes and why they are important. All of the information that I'm going to share with you that's written here in text is absolutely available on Claris's FileMaker help section and the documentation. So nothing is new. However, there are little square brackets here. So I grabbed this right off of the page. It says FileMaker is using indexes for searching and joining related tables. And just to be clear, I added in that square brackets for improving searches because you can search on fields that are not indexed. More on that in a moment. There are two types of indexes as the help section describes. There are value indexes and word indexes. And value indexes apply to almost all the fields that we're aware of, right? Text, number, date, time, and timestamp. And that'll also include the calculation fields that result in any one of those types. The word index is a special index. It's only available to text fields. So you can't do a word index on a number field, date field, etc. And this also applies to not only just a text field, but a calculation field that returns a text result. And what that word index is going to do is it's going to store and keep track of the unique words that are in that text field. We'll see some examples in these demos, and I look forward to more conversation about that as well, because I don't work with lots of large text-based field indexes in general, so some of you may have some more experience with that. But what I can tell you is, and you probably have figured it out by now if you aren't even new to what word indexes are, if you're storing each unique word that is in a field, and you have large text fields, meaning lots of text is stored in one of those fields. Well, what that can do is it can do two things. There are some pros and there's some cons. The pro is if you have to search within the field that contains these large text items, indexing is going to make that search a lot faster. I've bolded here, and I'm kind of keeping the theme that I had for this evening is like, yeah, we index, and yes, there are benefits to indexing, but I want to focus on the how we can control those indexes. So I've bolded here that what maybe the con of indexing, especially in the case of word indexes, is that you're going to increase your file size. Now, that's not just for word indexes, but if you're working with text fields that have a lot of text in them, you can bet on that being the case, that you have a larger file. Creating and managing field indexes. The default setting in FileMaker, I've got a screenshot right here. I created a brand new field, and these are the settings that come from just creating a field. The indexing is set to none, as in this checkbox right there. And it's also got the check mark for automatically create indexes as needed. Now, a little caveat, you might be saying like, yeah, but there are other things that would happen in these default settings. And that's true. There are some other sets, especially in the validation area, that could trigger that to be different by default. But just taking your average field, I called it my new field, made it a text field. This is what comes out of the box. And so my proposal is that you don't only rely on the defaults of what FileMaker gives us or sets up just when we create a new field. Know something a little bit more about your indexes and try controlling them. So that's my proposal here is let's control our indexes methodically. That was it. And I actually should have deleted these pieces of text. I will get rid of that. We're on to demos already. The part that I wanted to include in about the introduction is why I even picked this as a topic for a meetup. And it was very recently, actually, I came up with the topic. I was doing some work with or analysis of a client's solution. I know nothing about the solution, none of the bits and details about it. And I wanted to learn about the summary of it, like what tables do they have, how many fields, on and so forth. And one thing that caught my attention was the number of indexed fields. And some of these tables, one in particular had over 500 fields to it. Not all of them were indexed, but that's what had me focus on the topic of indexing. So I have a couple of screenshots that I want to share with you. These are just some the very first area of demo and sharing of screenshots in this case has to do with quick find. And this is what I suspected was the case of our client's file that they built themselves, by the way. Maybe a novice developer and has a lot of good inner workings to what they do is in the business, but I noticed that the indexes were quite large. So I want to show you this screenshot of what I had done and a little bit of getting ready for this particular meetup. I took a screenshot of a contact table. You can see all the different field names, and they are all text, so no hidden things like number, date, or word indexes at all. I performed a quick find on the layout that had every single one of those fields. And this is what happened almost immediately. And we'll see this in the demo as well. I've actually got a demo set up where we'll actually index some fields and create indexes. So when I did a quick find on a layout that had every single one of these fields, FileMaker instantly went from the non-index fields to, okay, every single field that was on that layout became indexed. And that may or may not be intentional. I want to show you just a quick result of that. So my file had 50,000 records in it, and we're going to play with that 50,000 record type of data set a little bit later. But here's the result of that. So the contact base file is before I had no indexes. I already showed you that screenshot of what that looked like. And all I did was one quick find. I don't even know what I was looking for, maybe CA, because it has the states. So I was hoping to find California. But with quick find, if we are not controlling it, not methodically approaching the indexes to our file, and also some work that has to happen in the layout, if we just let FileMaker do its thing, quick find is going to search for within every file, every field on that layout that has been included in our quick find. And so the most simple demo ended up with this kind of result. It started off as a 12.6 megabyte file with the 50,000 records. And that one quick find took that file and created almost 2.5 times larger a file because of the indexes that were included. Next, I had where I took that same file or a copy of that file, and I had some selective fields that I wanted. And I did the same kind of quick find, except that I had limited on the layout. I've got a screenshot of it right here. Instead of all the fields being enabled for quick find, I only enabled the ones that I wanted quick find to work on this layout. So I chose 3 of them. And only these 3 became indexed after performing that. So let's look at what happens when we, in this case, didn't just say, yeah, I don't know anything about which ones should be indexed or which ones should be available for quick find. We could see that, yes, there is some size increase, but in this case, it was noticeably smaller. So instead of 2.5 times the size, we got 1.3 times the size in my demonstration here. Switching gears here, I'm going to switch into the FileMaker mode. It is demo time. I've got a file that I created with a number of different tables. Let's just take a look at those out of the box here, their names. So we're going to index tonight. I'm going to show us what a table looks like when it has its index, just one field, or sorry, one field that we're going to focus on. What happens when we set it to a minimal index or an all indexing or turn indexing completely off in that case? We'll also look at what happens when we try to create relationships. As we saw earlier, we saw that one of the ways to create, or one reason that indexes are used, field indexes are used in FileMaker to create relationships. So we'll do that and see if we can coerce FileMaker to create a relationship. And then also I'll create a relationship between a global table or a global field and a contact field where we can do some indexing. All right, let me get out of here and we will go to that first layout. Let's index tonight. So indexing, I need to create a record first, otherwise I have no index and can't even look at what's inside the application itself or the field itself. I'm going to type a number in here into this number demo, and let's get a date. We'll use today's date and a time. Did I get that right? No, I think it's just a colon. Okay, timestamp. There, got my time, and I want today's date. I don't know why I'm fumbling on this. I enter timestamps all the time. And then finally, a text demo. Let's see. We've got a Meetup demonstration. All right. You can inspect a field's index by clicking in the field. And one way is coming up, or I know the command for it. It's viewing the index. Let me find that. I always use the command key, but from index is how I've usually found this window right here. And in our case, with the number field, the date field, timestamp, text, etc., we are getting into the value index as opposed to a word index. And I want to dig into that one field itself, the number demo field. Let's take a look at that. So earlier I mentioned that there are 2 types of indexes, the value index and the word index. And the way you get the value index is almost always on by default when it selects all. So FileMaker is doing that for me. You can see that I can't even tell it to specify a minimum index. I either have all or none. And really that minimum index, which we'll play a little bit more with, that minimum index is only available to me when we have text fields. So let's just see if that is accurate. And now I see why I didn't get my timestamp to enter. All right, so now I've got a text field and I can select none, minimal, or all. So FileMaker is giving us an option when it's a text field to either do a value index by selecting all, or the word index will actually force it to just create a value index, and as opposed to indexing every single word. I've got a couple of calculations here where let's go in here and start creating some indexes. So the way that you can invoke index creation as a user, I described quick find, right? That is one way. The other way is just simply going into find mode. And let's just see if we have anything in this field. I'll put an asterisk for the wildcard. And so FileMaker has performed a find on my calculation text field. I want to jump back in and see what has changed in that case. See that word indexed? It appears right before the actual calculation itself. That's indicating to me that FileMaker has done its job of indexing. This one, I thought we would just do a little testing here. I actually have this calculation result in a number, but I've put text into that field. So I want to look at the index that it created. Interesting, right? Did you expect that? So FileMaker did not know how to index this. I don't know if any of you have ever done this before. I am guilty of it. I've created a calculation which I wanted or expected to result in a text field, but left it as the default. This is another one of those defaults that are out there where the calculation is a number. So let's switch it up, go back here. Now I'm not going to do anything else about my search just yet, but let's see if anything had changed. And it did. FileMaker was able to tell me or figure out that the result is a text. Oh, and we indexed that field. It wanted to re-index that field for me.
Hey, Jay.
The other thing that you can, yes, sir, Chad.
I believe one of the ways to create an index is to use that command I function to create the index. And so there's a part of me that wonders if that calculations field index was redone when you changed the type, or if it was redone when you did the command I.
Ooh, that is a great question. And I don't have, do you know of a way that we could determine that? Or
Chad,
can you think about maybe how to, go ahead, Robert.
Are you sure that it prompts the index creation? Because I've never experienced that.
If you were to look at one of the fields that is not indexed, and then go to that field and do a command I on it, it would come back, and I'm 90% sure it would be indexed.
Let me do this. I had messed up in my setup of the demos here. All right, so we got a timestamp, and for all intents and purposes here, this text demo field hasn't been indexed either. So if I kind of jack things up with the other formatting type, we can use that text demo field. So let's go to the text.
Are they set to automatically create, or are they?
Yes, they are, Robert. So this one is set to none so far. This is the whole like the typical default, and automatically create. So let's not perform a find. And as Chad suggested, even looking at or trying to invoke from index, let's see if that does index the field. And it certainly does. Thank you, Chad. Let's go here to a field that it's been set up as none so far. And I've also overridden the automatically create index default checkbox. So I'm saying, I don't want you to index that field, FileMaker. I need to record that text, but don't index it for me. So let's see what happens here. When we try to invoke that option, finding from index, FileMaker is not going to give me any kind of index. And let's see, Sam is a common word in here. So let's look for Sam. So does finding invoke that index? Let's check our work. No, So FileMaker is able, I said this, I think, in one of the introduction pieces, it's able to still perform finds on fields that are not indexed, even when we tell it, don't index this field. It's just not going to be necessarily as fast as asked if we had indexed that. I've got a couple of files with those 50,000 records that we're going to do an exercise with, and we'll see if we can tell the difference between searching on a field that has indexes and searching on the same, like a copy of that same file, but that field won't be indexed. And we'll see if we can tell the performance difference, especially when it's hosted. So I'm introducing a little bit of latency there, I suppose, as opposed to this file on my computer being local. All right, and then let's go back to this
I
one.
have one
here.
other
Same.
question. Oh, sorry, maybe
Yeah,
you're
sure.
gonna get to this,
Go for
but
it.
I actually am kind of curious about what the index on this field would look like. Like if you were to index it and then look at it, I don't know that I could tell you exactly what it would whether it would be this whole block of text. I'm assuming every line here would be its own index, but I'm kind of curious to see what it ends up with. I'm assuming you're going to go there.
Cool. I've actually got two layouts, and I believe I was good enough to do this. Yeah, so each layout has its own table with these settings. So let's check that out. Let's leave the none one alone, and we'll go to the all. All right, and I don't have this one indexed yet. Oh, I thought I had. Let's not save that. It is indexed. Oh, because I called it indexed. All right. I thought we were going to create the index right here and there, right now. So we're going to view this index. Here is what that indexed field, or the index. Now keep in mind, I want you to take a look through this. And tell me if you're seeing any kind of like, what do you recognize about this index? And I'm going to point out one thing as you think about that. This table has one record. This is not hundreds of records, thousands of records. This is one record.
It's the values from the text.
It's the values from the text. Unique values, yes?
Yes, up
You
to
see any
100
repeats there?
characters.
Hey, thank you. I was wondering who would be the first to say that and when that would come up. Thank you, Robert. I'm going to go to the next version of this. Now this field, let's look at their settings so that my words aren't just words on the layout, etc. So the one that we were just looking at was set to all. Let's look at that index setting. So it had the all radio button, and it was set to automatically create indexes as needed. The one that we're going to look at now is same text that we're going to see, but this one just has that radio button for minimal. All right, I want to see the differences there. And so when we look at this index is the same so far. And it's minimal. Whereas when we go back to the all and select these individual words, this is what that description about the word index that FileMaker will create or can create. So in this case, each and every unique word has been stored in this case.
And Jay, when you say unique, do you have uniqueness constraints? Like, what do you define as unique?
No. Great question. I did not tell FileMaker to make it unique, and no, it's not set to. You're talking about the storage option and one of the validation settings, right?
Not really. I'm talking about case.
You mean, okay, let me see if I can tease out that detail. So one of you can see that the text that I copied was all uppercase, right? And I think you're getting at like, what if we wrote one of these, would you like them in a house? I'm copying that line basically and making it lowercase. Is that what you're getting at? And
Yes.
does that change our indexing? And let's show those words. So would you, let's look. In this case, we're not seeing a difference between the uppercase version that we've seen throughout here, right? Here's an uppercase, here's my lowercase. We're not seeing that difference. So it is unique. As far as why FileMaker is displaying the uppercase one only as opposed to the lowercase one, I don't have a good answer for that. That's a good.
I think it's the first entry in the index.
Oh man.
You could test that pretty easily. You could type like, I don't know, type lowercase zoo, then type uppercase zoo, and you'll see whether it shows it. But they're effectively
that.
equivalent because it's sorted on, it's stored as English, right? That's the default storage parameter, not ASCII or
Correct.
Unicode. So English, as far as it's concerned, capital ZOO is the same as lowercase ZOO is the same as Z capital O lowercase o. It's all the same.
I'd put a commit in between the two, but
Yeah.
Oh, I will do that.
If you want
Let's
to game
kill
it,
those.
yeah, I think you have to do that. Agreed.
Let's look at those words.
We should have choose something
There's
with
my
A's,
lowercase.
right? Yep.
Yep, there's our lowercase.
And
And
put the
here.
capital ZOO higher up in the list, yeah, just so it's not
just
about the
did
order
like
in the
that.
field.
Cool. Now let's look at it again.
Well, you replaced it, right? You didn't.
I did not, did I?
You did,
No.
I think.
I thought
Did
I
you?
left. No, I
Oh,
got zoo all the way
interesting.
at the bottom here.
I wonder if you put it below it.
So we're
That's-
walking
that's-
away with a question.
ah,
A little mystery here.
this is interesting.
Someone, yeah, right. I'm glad you asked that question, Robert. I don't think I would have noticed that, and it was coincidental that I had copied something that had all capitalization to it first. One more time, just to
Yeah,
double
and-
check. I did not replace it. Yes.
And one more detail about things that do not make a difference to index, unless, again, like Mark said, if the storage is set to Unicode or something like that. If you have accented characters, those do not make it into the index. Meaning,
I
like,
see.
if you have something with E acute, or something like that, then it will get stored just as a straight up letter and without the accent.
So even something, I was going to zoom in like that. You're
Yes.
saying like even that piece right there. Okay. So we've put in some weird funky character, and you're saying that will not be treated any more uniquely than this word right there, the like.
Correct.
Got
So
them next to each
uniqueness
other.
is unique, but in the index definition of unique.
Thank you, Robert. This is awesome. Okay. Chad, did I had those couple of layouts. Did we get to the
Yes.
to the
thank you.
question with your curiosity? Okay.
Yep.
Great. I want to show another way to invoke the indexing. So I think it's not necessarily layout based in this case. I want to just point out, I've got an invoice table, and its ID, I purposely took away indexing, and I'll show you something about that. It has to do with that whole unique conversation as well. And then invoice item. So I want the primary key from invoice to be the foreign key right here in the invoice item table. So with FileMaker, that's really easy to do, right? To build relationships, I'm going to make this kind of connection. That is all I've done to manipulate FileMaker at this point. So we know that we have to have records in order to have an index, don't we? And I'm going to borrow, sorry, I should have copied that before I left, and that's why I didn't copy it. I didn't even have it on the layout. They throw that out there really quickly. Great. Let's walk through this. So I created one record so far for invoice. Let's take a look at what our schema changes, if any. So this has not been indexed yet, and there's no index over here in our foreign key yet. Okay. I'm going to go over to this invoice item. going to create my new record, and I'm going to paste that in there. Has the schema changed yet? An invoice ID still is not indexed, and invoice item is still not indexed. Now explain that to me, anybody. What could trigger the indexing of that if FileMaker uses field indexing for both searching and for relationship building? Have I done anything wrong? Can I invoke that to be indexed? And when and how? You can talk while I'm doing this.
I would have expected what you did to make it indexed. I was curious what you had the field settings set to.
Oh, let's check it out. So in this one, we've got indexing is set to none. And
Yeah, you don't, and
That's
the
fine.
source key in the relationship doesn't have to be indexed. It's
Right.
the target that has to be
right,
indexed.
okay.
And that's
And
why
then
you can
this
use
one.
like a global field as a go-to related. You can populate a global, which you can't index. You can populate, an unstored calculation can be the source of a go-to related record. It's the target that you're going to that has to be indexable in order for that relationship to function.
Right. So how can I get those fields to at least the child field to be indexed in this case?
Once you have a child record, it should create a child field.
But he does have
with an
one.
index.
I did
Does it?
actually create it, a manufactured one, but let me enter some data in there now.
What
You
did
have
you
to have
look
one
at
that's
the,
actually joined to one, I think, though. Does that relationship allow creation?
Oh, let's check.
So once you allow to
I
like
did not
creation,
set that. Okay.
and that'll either trigger it or the first record you create will trigger it, I believe.
Let's see if we've triggered anything yet. Invoice, that's not
Nothing
indexed
there.
yet.
Yeah, no, that won't index.
And then this one,
Yes.
boom.
So creating the
Mark.
relationship to it is and allow creation implies that it's going to be pushing an ID that doesn't have to be indexed into a field that has to be.
I'm wondering if we can undo. I want to try to undo that. I'm going to do this, and can I tell this to go back to none, but I'll let it sit there on automatically create.
And I think if
Still
you
with
manually create a record that's joined, if you were to take that ID and put it onto a child record in the invoice ID field.
Which I did right here. I don't know if you had seen that. I copied this ID, went to invoice item. Here, I'll delete it. And create a new record. There's the primary key from the invoice record. And
I think I know what happened.
what happened?
So I think like when you first
Rosemary.
created the two records, you hadn't actually invoked the relationship by forcing FileMaker to make the join by displaying it in a portal or doing a find across the relationship. And it was drawing the portal on the layout, displaying the record with no fields in it or with no data in the fields that is creating your index.
So test that by going back to your layout and taking the portal off.
Sure. Okay. Let's go back to invoice. And I'll just cut it to my clipboard so we don't have it. Robert, are you chiming in too?
Well, if what Rosemary says is involved, then I would guess that if you had other fields in the child table that are relying on that relationship, for calculations, for lookups, for things like that, perhaps the same thing would happen even without having the portal involved. But
yeah, so if you were to have a calculation in the parent that was like do the invoice sum or something like that, that would probably force it as well.
So your theory in this case, Rosemary, we've reversed, right? I've got my invoice foreign key. I took away the index, and I also pulled off the portal as you suggested. So now let's just paste that portal back on here and go into browse mode. And let's see if just that changed something. That did it. Nice.
What's not clear is why is it's not showing any values in that portal if that's truly a joined record.
I did not have here, Mark. Sorry,
You have no
did not
values in the
populate.
fields.
Yep.
I got you. There you go.
Yeah, and that made it more difficult to see as a presentation here. So let's do
Got it.
iPhone. We got
Yeah, I mean,
one.
I think the way I used to
No.
talk about this, what I used to talk about this when I was talking about performance was this idea of what types of things invokes or triggers. I didn't want to use the word trigger because it has a lot of meanings, right, with script triggers and
Right.
things. But what kinds of things would invoke the movement of data, or in this case, the creation of an index? And you've covered a bunch of them, like doing a find, doing a quick find, viewing the index, establishing a join with allow create, establishing a join, an unstored calculation that relies on a relationship, regardless of what the status of the relationship setup is. There's all kinds of things that you can do to invoke or trigger an index to be created when it's essential that it be created if the field settings allow it to be created.
Yeah, that was a new one to me right there. I'm glad we stumbled on it. I would not have thought to, I would not have thought that the portal, the action of having to display data is what would trigger the actual indexing of it. We knew that if we, or pretty much knew that if we did a find on a field that was in there, that would index it naturally.
Would you say then that the creation of relationships doesn't trigger the indexing or cause the indexing? It's only when data through that relationship is needed to be displayed or calculated somewhere, the FileMaker kind of needs to go use that relationship, let's say, that's what kind of enforces that indexing to happen. Is that fair?
That sounds right, Chad. I mean, like I agree with you, but I'm interested if others have a different different take on it. Okay. I want to check one other thing here.
Makes sense.
Oh, sorry.
I was so quiet that I want to say something. So yes, that seems to be the case.
Okay. Awesome, Valentine. There's one thing that I had noticed that it's probably in the documentation, but one thing that tripped me out. Let me see if I can recreate what I experienced not long ago. I think it was earlier today. I specifically, this isn't a good practice, but I specifically changed this so that I could probably like recreate this problem. I'm actually not going to do it with that field. I want to create a brand new field. And we are all unique. All right, let me create this field here. I don't want to do anything else but to tell FileMaker, hey, when you're dealing with this field, make sure that it's got a unique value to it. Okay, that's all I'm interested in. I want you to notice what happened there with the indexing. So FileMaker needs, in this case, in order to do this validation for you, it's basically, you can think of any field that's in your database where you want FileMaker to handle the uniqueness aspect of it, not by scripts, but by FileMaker, right? From the core architecture of the database. It will immediately create an index for you. Let's look at that. So it was set to none. And this is what caught my attention. I'm like, let's see, I don't want indexing at all. So, okay, there. And the indexing didn't go away. Wait, hold on. I don't want indexing and don't automatically create it. And then this is what was great. FileMaker explaining to me, hold up. If you want to do validation about uniqueness, we have to be able to index that field. So I thought that was pretty cool. And going back to saying like what I wouldn't do normally, had to do with the IDs, your primary keys of your fields, right? I want this one to be unique. So in that case, I had actually I turned off the unique value. And usually I would have a field that has a primary key. It's got some bolstering to it, which will have the unique value because I only want one invoice with that ID. And I don't want it to ever be empty. because it would ruin my business logic. So that's how it was set up, and I stumbled on that validation piece and thought, why does it keep indexing the field for me? Oh, after a couple more clicks, that's what happened. I don't think I need to, but well, it'll be really quickly here. This kind of relationship, and I probably need to explain it or show a little detail as opposed to just the name. I have a table called global, and it only has one field in it, and that field's storage is set to global. Notice when you either get to index something or you get to make a field global. So in the case here, when we select global storage is what is desired, FileMaker is going to turn off all, just basically make this completely uneditable. And as Mark had described earlier when we were talking about relationships, really the how did you word it, Mark? Was it the foreign key? I'm not sure. In this case, the right
I called it
side
the source.
of the
Yeah, I called it the
relationship,
source. Yeah, the source key that, you know, versus the target key. I don't know what the right terminology might be, the primary key versus the foreign key, but the key you're going from versus the key you're going to is the way I think about it. If I'm going
Right.
to a related record, to make that jump to work, I have to be
So
able to take this value that doesn't even have to be stored. It could be global.
Mhm.
And I have to be able to effectively tell FileMaker to find it. It's not really doing a find, right? But I'm just using kind of what happens. It's going to go find all the records in that other table that have an index value that matches the value that I'm starting with up to that 100
Right.
character limit, like Robert pointed out. It can
And
only do that
a
if there's an
question for
index.
you,
Yeah.
can you go backwards? Can you go from contact to the global in that case?
If you do, it will index that field.
The global, even though it's a
No, it
global
won't.
field?
It won't. It will not let you go back to the global. And
Right.
but if it wasn't a global, like if you were going to go from the invoice item to the invoice, and that ID was not indexed on the ID side for invoice,
Mhm.
it would then index it. But it would fail on the
I'm
global.
going to turn this back around this way because I think of this is just the way my brain's wired, and if I don't do it, I'll start hiccuping. I wanted to point out something. This is something that I missed. Full disclosure, it's on a recording, and if this is good enough to go to YouTube, okay, then it's going to be spread to the world. I can't tell you how many times I missed this on the FileMaker certification exam. They would ask, one of the questions had to do with the relationship graph, right? There are a number of questions like that. So I'm not going to say what the question was. That was as much as I can disclose there. But I want to point out or ask someone else to mention, what do you see that's different between this relationship here and the relationship between these two tables? What's catching your eye?
Are we allowed to answer if we know the question, or you want us to guess?
The crowfoot on the bottom relationship shows that it's
That is
many.
one, Ed. You're right. So this is saying this is one, and it relates to many invoice items. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to do my magic mouse too much. There
But
we
it can
go.
only show that crow's foot because that invoice item field is not set also to uniqueness. That ID
right, too.
invoice field is not set to be unique, so therefore there can be many. Versus the one above is set to be unique, which is why it only shows a single line to the contact ID, because it can only be one.
What do you see on the left-hand side of it?
That bar indicates it's a global value. It's not a indexable value.
Yeah, I was going to say it indicates that it is a non-indexed value. I'll just put here, let me give this, I'm going to call this one not a global, and I'll create that. Oh, yeah, you're right. Shouldn't do that. Not global. There. Don't name your fields as I am naming them in this case. And I'm going to effectively turn off indexing. So it's not a global field. I'm not doing global storage, but I am saying I don't want indexing to be done. And let me just change this relationship from the global to this non-index one. And that ending right there, that bar, if you will, still remains the no index indicator. So,
So it's kind of a shorthand for not indexed or not indexable, because in one case
Correct.
it was not indexed, in the other case it was not indexable. In one
Right.
other case, it's uniquely indexed. And in the third case, it's can be indexed and not unique.
So for
Nice.
kicks and grins, if you go
Yeah.
back to your not global field and
Okay.
make it where it could be indexed, but it's not. And let's see what that little connector changes.
And just
to.
go right back to this.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in that case,
Do we have to now put a beep on our edit? I think
No.
we're gonna have to censor our
okay.
edit.
You haven't given away. You have just pointed out that there is meaning to all those little symbols in the relationship graph.
That's right.
And you might maybe be asked about them on the exam.
You might be, you might not be. I want to make sure that we get to ask some questions. And if you're like, none of us have questions, we want to see more stuff, I can show you some more stuff on a hosted file. It's really easy to set up. But I'm going to stop right there and see if there are some questions or other topics about what you want to know about indexes or what you already know about indexes.
I don't know if we can give you homework. I want to ask a question, but I don't want to have to end up with the homework, basically.
Okay. You just want to assign
So-
the homework teacher. Got it.
Well, you know how in like record creation, record edits, and record deletion, they all end up writing to the index for the fields that are indexed in your table, right? And normally, if we have something that is not transactional, like if you're looping to create your records and doing those things, or edit or delete, or if you are doing a replace field content or something like that. So my understanding is this is not transactional, so I can only guess that the index is being updated as things happen, you know, for each record. And now, well, we've had transaction in the past, but FileMaker 19.6 introduced a new way to do transactions. I'll say it that way, where we can push all of our edits, let them be record creation, record edits, or deletions at the same time. And I don't know if there's any difference in how FileMaker writes to the index, because it has all of the payload at once, you know, and can do all of its job at once. So I'd be curious into a comparison, you know, to say, if you have that many edits to do, if you do it in a transaction, you know, it like writing to the index is somehow optimized, then it ends up being faster, or so I understand it would be hard to isolate, you know, the part of it which may be index related and the part of it which may be because we're relying on other controls. But
Let me make sure I
it's
understand
interesting.
what your question is, Robert. With the new transaction script steps that we have, the ability to do a bunch of performances, you know, like this table, that layout, and then finally wrap all of that up into a transactional commit. You want to know, is it does the creation or updating of indexes, does that process change when we use the transactional script steps? Is that the question?
Yeah, is there a performance change, basically, because it has all the edits. It's not forced to do like, oh, let's make this one change to the index and then wait for the next change, and then let's do this one change to the index, and then it could say, well, I know everything I need to insert into that index, and here it is, and let's do that in one fell swoop, so to speak. You know,
That's a great question. That almost sounds like one of those, you know, if you ever gone to, you know, DevCon in the past, the under the hood sessions that you get to sit with. Is it Clay? Am I getting the right name? And he would talk about how things under the hood worked with FileMaker.
Yes.
It seems like it would be one of those questions.
Yeah, I'm sure
Um,
like there's engineers who know the answer from the design, they know what
yeah.
has changed or not changed, and they'd be able to
Rosemary's
answer
furiously
without
typing this
without
out, right,
testing
Rosemary?
anything. But on our end, we'd have to test for things like that. So yeah.
Yes, I did. I didn't furiously type. I furiously like wrote down a note in my notebook. But I know Vince Monano has done a lot of testing with the new performance
Transaction.
and new
Mhm.
transaction script stops. So you may want to check the Beeswax blog. So I just can't remember where he's done it, but he's done a couple of articles for the Beeswax blog about this, and he's also got recorded presentations for both Dig FM and FM Disc from the last few
Oh,
months.
great.
So
Fantastic. Yeah. If
I don't know if
you
he
guys,
specifically talked about it isolating the index updates versus like the whole data payload, but
right.
I will send a
It's-
note to Clay in the morning to see if he has any feedback.
There was one demo that I was going to show you folks. I have no idea how long it takes. I did not try running it. So it might be one of those things where we can run it while we're talking. I could just share the screen in the next couple of minutes here. But it had to do with importing. And so one of the parts about the presentation, or one of the pieces that I wanted to have you at least think about here, and Robert, you're getting into that with, hey, does this change things with the transactional processes that we have now? And it had to do with performance. If you basically aggregated everything that we talked about here today and saw that fields can be indexed, and you can tell FileMaker not to index a field. And we know that indexing can make our searches or finds perform better when we index them. But on the other hand, it can make the file size larger. When you start putting those things together and thinking about, add in another few variables like the number of records that are in your tables, or the number of fields that you're allowing indexable, and how you might be hosting that file. Is it on a server that's kick butt? It's got a really fast hard drive. Or are you just using it locally anyway? Are people going out over the WAN, or are they connecting on a local area network? Are they doing that with wired or wireless? This isn't all about, I don't want to go down the whole, like, here's how you make databases perform really well and about performance as a whole. However, if you start thinking about those things that might require FileMaker to create indexes, and also, very importantly, to keep them updated. So a record edit, when someone changes a record, maybe takes that big, large text file and ends up editing some part of it. And if we start throwing in those other variables that we talked about, including numbers of users, numbers of records, the internet connection that you have to your FileMaker server, we could be talking about some performance hits here and there. And so there might be some considerations that you do in the design of your application of when you're going to index and when you don't need to index. Jeremy and I, Jeremy, you've been muted the whole time, but earlier today, when we were talking, he brought up a good point, and it got us riffing. And it's kind of a, Jeremy, just chime in here real quick if you can recall exactly what we were talking about. It's the pros and the cons, but I think there was like the cost of something too, right? You don't just get indexing benefits without some kind of cost.
Yeah, I think
Did I get it right?
I think you did. The way I always think about it, and the way I try to describe it to clients when it comes up, is you have to pay your taxes at some point. And if you want to take the metaphor far enough, you can say you could pay your taxes little by little every day, or you can pay them all in one big lump sum at the end of the year, right? So there's been a number of times in projects where maybe we were creating a report, summarizing a bunch of data, and it's just taken a really long time to put out that report, and ended up being because of values needing to be indexed to be summarized on that report. And so I kind of posed the question to the client, is the amount of time that it takes to create the report okay, given the fact that your data entry is really snappy? Because as an alternative, we could kind of force indexing while you're entering the data, say like, adding line items to invoices or something like that, right? We could have it force that indexing and do all of that math and store it so that when you run your report, it's basically instantaneous. It's just pulling all the values in that you've indexed over time. You've paid your taxes kind of like steadily over time. But that is going to mean that maybe that invoice layout isn't quite as snappy as it used to be, because it takes just a moment or two to get everything added up and stored away in an indexed value. But it's come up several times, and and sometimes the client, honestly, sometimes the client is like, no, we like our snappy interface. We're okay waiting for that report to run. It really doesn't matter. But sometimes it's more important. They want to see that. They want to get that report in the end.
And some of that's based on like architecture, right? Like whether we're relying on FileMaker summary fields to roll up the data when we run the report versus perhaps storing that data in a field. I think you used invoices, right? Whether it's invoice line items or invoices, and storing that summary that one time in that field and indexing it. Yeah, you'd get a really fast query out of it. Two people are raising their hands. Roberts was first, and then I'm back to you, Ed. Robert.
All right. Yeah. So I just want to mention, I think two things. One is, I was a bit surprised that today you didn't talk about value lists, but index also matter for value lists.
They sure do.
And the other thing I wanted to say is, yeah, so the index will matter for those things, and it's the same. When we talked about uniqueness and uppercase, lowercase, accented characters, it's the same as the search, really. In search, like you can search for something in lowercase or search for something in uppercase, and it's not going to make a difference. Same thing with the accented characters. If you search with something with the accented character or without the accent, it's going to return the same stuff.
Great point.
And I think it is a bit of the same with the sort. Like if you are sorting values, it's not going to care if one entry has this one word lowercase and this other word uppercase. Again, unless it is being stored as Unicode.
Okay.
And some people will make the assumption that a select statement will give you the index if you do something like select this field and then apply distinct to it. But again, the select.
You're saying using execute SQL, right?
Yes.
In that case.
Yes.
Okay.
But the select is sensitive to case and to accents. Those are different entries for SQL as opposed to our index. And in what you were describing also for the list of things to pay attention to, if you're over one or not, or the other thing to pay attention to is the data distribution. So if you have this one field where there's only 4 possible values, the price you pay for the index on something like that versus the price you pay for indexing something where it's a date, but it's a random date, or it's a number, it's in a random number. Every record might have a different value. Then the index is going to be much larger on something like that. So
very good point. Yeah, like you're talking about like maybe a contact type, right? Where there might only be a limited number versus could be dates for the last 10 years, right? For every single day. That's a much larger index. Yeah. Ed, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's kind of a corollary. Early on, you were talking about the impact of quick find.
Yes.
Not being trained in database development early on. We had every field on a layout set for quick find. and it was anything but quick. So
Yeah, it was called large find at that point, right?
yeah, loaded find. So
Yeah.
I watched a Nick Hunter video, and he will take quick find off of all the fields on the layout, put merge fields off screen for the fields that you actually really want to search. And
Oh, that's a great, yes.
put the quick find on that, and it's very snappy.
That is a great suggestion. There are two places that quick find can be set up on the layout, right? At the layout, the overall layout setup, you've got whether or not quick find can even be done, right? So in this case, I've turned off quick find. So this isn't even iterable. Helps control that. The other aspect, though, is when I think what you described there was select all fields and turn off quick find. So I'll uncheck the include quick find, and then maybe off screen, as you might suggest, let's let people search by company. Actually, I don't have any data with company, so let me do that again, by first name. All right, first name, and I'm going to select that one as quick find. All the others are not, and then we'll have to go back to our layout and allow quick find. So to help control that a little bit, let's see, I've got first names and last names. I'm sorry if I don't have your guys' name in there. I put in first name, so if I look for Adams in this case, I'm not going to find it, right? Because I only enabled quick find for the first name field. So, all right, let's try that again. Dad. Yeah, that is a great solution. You can do it one of two ways. If you don't want that extra element on your layout, Ed, you can certainly just control what fields you want. That off-screen thing is helpful for perhaps calculation fields, maybe where you're like, I want to show the distinct first name and a distinct last name field here to the user, but I want them to be able to search by a concatenated version of those two fields. Then I might do it over there. Otherwise, I might just leverage this field
Well,
right here. But
the advantage I saw was I can copy that merge field from off screen and paste it on another layout, and not have to go through the exercise of figuring out what fields I want to do the quick find for.
Gotcha. Yes, and yes. Mark, you have your hand up.
Just one little addition thing to add, like Robert did before I have to go. And this is something similar to what Ed just suggested, which is something I've stumbled into over the years. Is I think as developers, we often find ourselves going to these, data layouts, right? A layout that's created automatically for a table. It has all the fields on it. Maybe it's not part of the UI, but it's something that we use for troubleshooting. It's something we use for isolating sets of records and doing finds. And forget that since by default, the fields that we've created throughout the database are set generally by default to index automatically, we might be creating indexes inadvertently, right? So I think what Ed found is that they created this layout, they put all the fields on it, they used quick find, and boom, they created indexes all over the place without even meaning to. Most of those fields might not have been useful for indexing. The 6 out of the 20 fields in a table might have been the ones that everybody searches on all the time, but the other 14 are now along for the ride. And like you said before, depending on the variety of data in those fields, that could create bloat in the file over time that's unnecessary and doesn't add any value to anything other than larger backups and more disk space.
Absolutely.
I think we as developers do that sometimes too without realizing it, because the client mentions an issue, we start searching fields like creation date, modification date, created by. These are fields that most users never search in, right? They normally are navigating the data based on business rules. We're often as developers looking to look up who did what when, right? Or let me find all the records with a particular ID or combination of IDs and creation dates. And next thing you know, we've created indexes on fields that normally would not have been indexed. And so I think getting familiar with just being mindful of the fact as a developer that you may be leaving behind a trail of indexes in your troubleshooting work or your development work that are unintentional. I remember a long time ago, I used to have a habit of, after working on large systems for a while, I might go in and turn all the indexes back to none on a system, let them automatically recreate themselves. I knew that that meant that for the first day or so of using the system, that various users or testers or whatever would run into some slow performance as indexes were recreated, as they navigated, as they displayed records, that they would be paying a little bit of price up front. But I also knew that all the non-essential indexes that I may have created along the way, or they may have created along the way, would be eliminated. So there are some benefits to doing what I call index maintenance that are worth considering and thinking about too, especially on large systems, especially when you troubleshoot using some of those techniques I mentioned.
And just to recap there, sometimes unintentionally, even as developers, when we're troubleshooting or investigating an existing database, we may be searching in fields that users normally aren't searching in. And if the settings are right, we may have just indexed and added some bloat just based on our own search when we really probably shouldn't have or didn't need to. And furthermore, you're saying you might consider doing a little maintenance every once in a while and checking, right?
Correct.
Speaking of that, if you guys are FM perception users, I know I am. And if you're not an FM perception user, you're probably somehow have tinkered with the database design report. That will tell you, globally speaking, what fields are indexed and how they are indexed, whether it's minimal, set to minimal or all. It's a really good way to like analyze an application from a high level. And yeah, you feel free to peel off here, you guys. I know we're going long. I'm enjoying it. And if you're going to stick around at all, I'm going to at least start something in the background here on a couple of hosted files, but don't feel like you need to stick around. There's no offense to that. What I am going to do, if you do decide to stick around, is show the difference between importing a large number of records into a file, such as this one, where we're going to index every single field versus one where indexing is turned off. And it's just a little speed thing. If nothing else, I'll get it on the recording and share it with you on the side. Any other questions? Robert, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, just one more detail about
Sure.
like file recovery. That too has something dedicated to indexes, and it's the option to rebuild or not rebuild the indexes when we do a recover.
Oh, yes. And we also have that when we're using the migration tool. If I'm not mistaken, the FM FileMaker data migration tool, I believe rebuilding indexes is an option in that as well.
On that one, I'm not sure.
Okay. I think it's one of the settings that we use typically in at least one particular client solution that I have. Yeah, the thing that if you end up sticking around, you don't have to, but I'll get it on the recording anyway, is to try to show, I apologize, I meant to do this manually using Quick Find. Want to show the difference between importing into a table where maybe I was not negligent, but not careful about what got indexed and didn't get indexed. In this case, I've indexed every single field, or at least I'm trying to get FileMaker to think that everything is going to be indexed that way. And I will import my large data set into that, see if there's any kind of speed difference. Rosemary, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just one other thing. You're talking about how indexing can slow down imports. It can.
Yes, ma'am.
It can also slow down deletions, because
Deletions as well.
every time you delete a record, you have to re-update
You
your
gotta
update index.
update your.
So if you're doing large batch deletions, like if you're deleting everything in a found set, for example, that can have a pretty big impact on the index as well.
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. I'm going to add that to my notes.
Yeah, and the other thing is that is one of the reasons for the like delete all records script step, or not delete all records, the truncate table, because if you know, for those clients who were doing really big batch operations when they were legitimately deleting everything, if you had a huge table and you were, flushing out all the data and replacing it
Right.
once a month or something. We had a couple of clients that were like, this should not take this long when I'm deleting everything.
To delete. But it sounded like they either had a large index because of the number of records, or maybe several different fields in one particular table that were indexed. And so all of their across the board, right? Like probably even what I'm doing right here, I'm importing 50,000 records and every single field has been set to be indexed. So my expectation here is that this process is going to take a bit longer than importing into a copy of the same database, but I don't need to index. So I'm expecting it to go a little bit faster.
Yep. So yeah.
So is it basically the whole CRUD thing, right? Create, read, update, and delete. All four of those could or might require changing the index, either adding to or taking away from. Does that sound accurate?
Yep, that sounds accurate to me.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps not reading, but
I'm sorry, you're right. You're absolutely right.
In the same fashion that than what Rosemary described, if you have a uniqueness constraint on a field, and you have a ton of records already in your table, well, as you go adding a new record each and every time, it's going to check for the one value you're trying to insert against a larger and larger index. And that itself is going to slow down. It's going to perform worse and worse over time.
Did you guys see the difference between those two imports? Next time I'm going to time it.
Yes.
But we got it on video. This one where no fields needed to be indexed, and the one over here where all the fields needed to be indexed. So I know that might not be a particular business case, but that I knew it would be faster with unindexed fields. I didn't know it would be that much faster. So I'll have to measure that out and get some reporting there. Thanks so much for participating, you guys. Rosemary, I'm glad you were able to come along and contribute.